educators. I'm here today with Ron Lemonager from Purdue Animal Science, our beef cattle specialist. And what we're going to do today, Ron, is talk just a little bit about this problem we have. As in our background, we can see it. We've got a drought in our area. It's the middle of July. People are starting to think about feeding hay. Some of the things that we're going to have to do with these cattle that we have out here, that we're going to be able to maybe extend our amount of hay that we've got, somewhat our pastures, and some things we got to do to clear it up. One of the options is early weaning, and I want you to talk a little bit about that.
I think this is really a good opportunity to think about early weaning these calves. You know, as you look around and the field that we're standing in is predominantly a grass pasture. There's very little legume in here. And, you know, while if you drive by on the road, you know, you might say, well, there's forage out there. But if you really get down in here and you start looking, most of the forage, you know, there's some seed heads that are popping up. But when you really get down here and you start evaluating this pasture, you know, the grasses are really 4-inch height or below. And so if we don't pull these cows into I'll say a dry lot or a semi-dry lot area at this point and continue to graze these pastures, when we do get a recovery rain, it's going to be really tough for these plants to have enough leaf material, you know, to start the growth process again. So early weaning is sure a strategy that needs to be considered. And you know, basically our data and our experiences with early weaning suggest that, you know, you can wean a calf when they're 70 days old. What we found is that if you wean a calf at less than 70 days as an individual calf, they seem to be those calves that have more stunted growth. They kind of look like those little pot-bellied orphans that you sometimes see. And so, but after 70 days, these calves, you know, work really, really good. And, you know, a really simple ration for that would be, you know, a third corn, a third soybean hulls, and a third corn gluten feed, in the pelleted form probably.
So one of the things we can do is we can take those calves, we can early wean them, but we could also start creeping them ahead of time. And we'll take a look at that at creep feeder here a little bit and some of the things we're looking at. So if we were going to take them off, a good creep ration or a good early weaning ration, either one is, there's several out there, but we're using some byproducts like distillers grains and soy hulls, things that have gotten some fibers in them and some things that'll work for these calves a little bit better that way. What's the difference between the corn gluten and the distillers grains? People kind of get confused on those two.
Well, the distillers grains obviously comes from the ethanol industry, and it's a little higher in protein. It'll run on a dry basis. It'll run close to 30% crude protein. It can have somewhere between 8 and 12% fat. Depends on which plant you're pulling it from. It could be pretty high in sulfur. And when you compare that to gluten, gluten is going to be at lower levels of protein, fat, and sulfur, and so it becomes a little bit safer product. The thing that's nice about gluten is that we can also pellet it. And so the pelleting process, where distillers grains has got some real challenges in that regard, and so it is more of a meal form. And so when you add, you know, a cracked corn and soybean hulls, which is usually in a pelleted form as well, so cracked corn, soybean hulls, and corn gluten, the thing that's nice about that is that it stays in suspension. Whereas if you added corn and soybean hull pellets and you put distillers with that, you're going to get a lot of settling out of the distillers grains.
A lot of fines in there.
And a lot of fines.
Yeah. And that's what you end up seeing, and it settles out those fines towards the bottom. So it's nice to put those in a pelleted form like you got with the gluten along that line. So if we're going to do that, then again, another ration that would be about a third is something kind of close.
Well, and I think another ration that we've done, a third, and a third of corn, soybean hull pellets, corn gluten pellets, makes a nice ration. Another one would be
with some mineral.
With some mineral, there's no question. Okay, we're going to, all of the corn byproducts are fairly high in phosphorus, and so we always have to add some calcium, and the calcium level has got to be higher than the phosphorus level. Otherwise, we're going to run into some urinary calculi problems in calves, and basically we want a ratio, in a perfect world, it needs to be something about 1.5 parts of calcium to 1 part of phosphorus. 2 to 1 is really a nice one. When I formulate rations, I'll sometimes go down to 1.25 to 1. but that's probably as low as I want to go. You start approaching 1-to-1 ratios or higher phosphorus and calcium, and then that's when you're looking at urinary calculi problems.
So in this situation we're looking at, one of the options we have is to start creeping the calves to begin with, and then once they get to the age that we're taking a look at, we could possibly wean them off early. We can go ahead and wean them off of that, and then we can also put all these animals into, the calves could be weaned off, but the cows could also be dry lotted too, and that's another option that we have to kick them off these pastures.
Well, and I think, you're absolutely right. And, the thing that some of the data that we've generated is that when we wean a calf, the cow's dry matter intake will drop by about 25%. And so by early weaning the calf and letting the cow so-called rough it a little bit more, that gives us some real opportunities. And this happens at a time when the nutrient requirements of the cow are really pretty low, okay, in terms of the production cycle. Because the pregnancy is probably 2, 3, maybe 4 months along. That fetus isn't taking very many nutrients, and so this cow has a very low nutrient requirement. And so by early weaning, that's a positive. The other aspect of this is that when you take the calf off, there's a certain amount of trampling that goes with the forage just because of the extra hoof traffic. And so that's another component. And then, of course, these calves, as they start getting in that 3-month-old, 4-month-old kind of age range, those calves are starting to consume a fair amount of forage themselves. And so by pulling these calves off of these cows, I think conservatively we can conserve maybe 30-35% of the forage base that we've got, and basically that stretches your forage supply.
Also, when the opportunity comes when you do that too, you get to take a look at the cows and you can say which one of them may need to go down the road too at that point, and you got an option of doing that also.
You bet. And this is when we're in this kind of a dry, hot kind of an environment, and not a lot of prospects of moisture in the at least in the near term. Early culling, okay, is probably a strategy that I think producers ought to think about. And I would preg check my cows. And you can do that either by having your local veterinarian do that, or there are some blood tests on the market that are reasonably priced that are pretty accurate if you get out in that 30+ days of pregnancy. And I think I would start to think about culling those cows that are open, those cows that maybe are the tail end performing cows, for sure the cows that have got a bad attitude. Cows that maybe have got a broken udder or bad eyes, foot problems, structural problems of some kind. Those are the cows that probably ought to move down the road. And I would suggest that you market earlier rather than later, because as we get deeper into a drought scenario, okay, and more people run out of forage, okay, there's going to be more and more cows hit the market. And so, that usually causes a dip in cow prices, and so the earlier that you can make those decisions in this process, probably the better off you are financially.
Well, we're just taking a look at a few options that beef cattle producers would have with a situation like that this year with our drought. And these are some of the things that we think that might be an opportunity for you to do and to take a look at. Appreciate this opportunity to talk with you, Ron. Thank you.
This presentation was a production of the Animal Science Department at Purdue University.